harassing raids. They were able to have
teach you a
freedom
lesson
of
sort of
movement
thing.
up and down the coast. They were blockading the coast, doing an economic stranglehold on them, and also bringing the war to the seat of the American government. Apparently, in retribution for the Americans burning York in the spring of 1813, Toronto today.
Mm.
You know,
it's great because actually the American National Park Service, two of the key themes that they're working on are the burning of the White House. You know, it's called the White House because they had to paint it white to cover up the burn scars, and they're discussing the Star Spangled Banner. So in two of those occasions, it's sort of I think they're focusing on the Canadian element of the whole thing, which is great, I think.
And yet it's often called a war that was forgotten. Because it was, England didn't pay much attention to it. They did give them a hammering sort of, but they were busy with Napoleon, really.
Yes.
They were blockading all of you know, France and so forth, so they were pretty busy. That was their big deal. And so it's only means something to us here, and there are conflicting ideas about what it does mean. The Americans, no, I won't say the Americans. Some people claim that the Americans won it for certain reasons. Some people claim that the British won for some reasons. The Canadians, and I don't want to tear apart your celebration ideas, but we're going to get to those too. But this wasn't Canada fighting. This was Britain against the United States, right?
Well,
I mean,
of course
they did it on what became our soil later, but this is how is this a Canadian story?
Well, of course there was no Canada at that time. Right. We didn't confederate until 1867. So as the St. John River Society has put it, it was in defense of a notion. I mean, the idea of Canada was out there, that the British colonies in North America should confederate. That idea was out there. And I think that this war showed that those colonies could band together against a common enemy, and that they were stronger together than they were as separate entities. So in that way, it laid the foundation for Canada. And certainly, a lot of what we talked about is the Royal Navy and the British Army. But let's not forget, like I said, that the New Brunswick 104th Regiment was a regiment of New Brunswickers. Mm-hmm. And similarly, the Royal Newfoundland Regiment was involved as well. And there were other regiments in Canada that were either raised to line status, or became Canadian regiments within the British Army, and there were also lots of militia regiments in Ontario and Quebec that fought as well. So there were lots of Canadians. Yes, there were British regulars, but there were lots of Canadians that were part of this story. And I believe that it's a great demonstration of how Canada thought about coming together, and this laid the foundations for it.
Okay.
So it's also left a legacy in terms of our relationship with the United States, and we have to remember that today we've had 200 years of undisturbed peace with our neighbors. It's the longest undefended border in the world, and that framework for working together and trade and being good friends and neighbors was laid down in 1812 and has lasted until today, and that's a legacy that we should be thinking about as well.
And a lot of the settlers in southern Ontario, right, were United Empire Loyalists. They were former Americans who had left and didn't want the good old boys coming in, right? They had left for a certain reason. They didn't agree with what was going on down there. Mm-hmm. So they had reason to defend the soil too, I suppose. Right?
Same in New Brunswick. In fact, there's a story around the 104th and when it got going that I think is pretty true, that the 104th and that march was actually created in the sitting room of Jonathan Odell's house on the corner of Brunswick and Church, and of course he was a loyalist, and so he was I forget his position in the government at the time, you'll remind me.
He had been provincial secretary.
Yeah, I thought he was secretary.
I think he just retired.
He just retired. But he and some other senior people were the ones who said, we need to put this together. We need to be, doing this for, as Brian said, a notion, this notion of a nation that had yet to be born.
Okay, let's get some of the events during the time remaining that we're going to see, hopefully, during the next couple of years. The 104th March recreation, you're going to do it in certain areas of the route. Now, Fredericton, obviously, since it's the starting point. What will be next? Like King's Landing, because it's period piece, even though it didn't exist at that time in the form it is, but you could get the feel for it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we're going to actually we're going to start in St. John because there were soldiers who came up from St. John to Fredericton
from Fort Howe.
Yeah, they would have been at Fort Howe at the time.
Yeah,
and you're even talking about doing some of the recruiting parties. So even before the 104th set off, they had to go out and recruit their troops. So we're looking at doing some of those activities around the province, like Madawaska, where they did some recruiting, and other areas in the province.
That's right, yeah. We're also working with some groups in St. Andrews, because there was a contingent of the 104th down there, and we want to connect their story to this. And then we'll actually be in Fredericton on Saturday, February 16th, 2013, which is the exact 200th anniversary of the day the first group left from Officers Square.
Somebody's doing some planning somewhere.
Yeah. Well, you know, we want to do this on Saturday so we can invite the public, and the February 16th just happened to be a Saturday. It was our lucky year. And then we'll be on to King's Landing, Woodstock, Florenceville, Bristol, maybe Perth, Andover, Edmundston, and Fort Ingle and Cabano, Quebec as well.
Oh, don't forget Grand Falls.
Oh, pardon me, Grand Falls. Pardon me, Grand Falls can also, yes.
Now, where are they going to walk?
Not on the river.
Not on the river, and not through the woods, right?
Right. Well, we're currently kind of working out the actual on-the-ground logistics. I think in several communities, like I think, for example, in Florenceville, Bristol, there's a lovely section of Trans-Canada Trail there that is, you know, close to amenities for the public to be able to use, but would, you know, follows closely along through that community. So it's a nice place, and that would probably be an example of one place that we would use. The Trans-Canada Trail and Sentiambi Trail here along the St. John River run in close proximity to the river, so in many cases it provides a lovely, safe pathway for the public to travel along with those soldiers and reenact the march. And we certainly have been working with Sentiambi Trails about getting those trails prepared for the public to be able to use them safely during those times when we're in those communities. And then in other places, we'll have to do some more investigating, but we're working hard to make sure that people will be able to get out, have a great day, get out in our fresh New Brunswick winters. I know we'll have snow, and get out on their snowshoes and their cross-country skis and march with the soldiers and commemorate this important event. Okay,
Brian, let's get to the events that you're helping to shepherd that are going to be taking place in the province. What can people look forward to seeing and doing?
Actually, the committee has just recently been struck, and so that's our first duty, is to look at the schedule of events. So this committee is a bottom-up kind of committee. So the first thing we've done is put a call out to all the different historical organizations in the province and said, you know, what activities are you planning? And then it's our committee that's going to help coordinate those activities and share the information. So that's our goal. So we don't actually yet even have a schedule of events,
okay.
And that's something that we're developing. But it is important to note that, like I keep trying to reinforce the fact it is a provincial effort. And there was a significant Acadian and French aspect to this, wasn't there, Gary?
Yeah.
Want to give us a bit of background on that?
Well, obviously the Acadians were recruited into the 104th. Again, because of the records, we don't exactly know how many, but we have an idea based on the names and the nominal rolls. As Molly said, the two people that went with Rainsford on his rescue mission appear to have been from the Madawaska area. You know, and that's certainly a significant thing. A lot of the members of the 104th are recruited, or not a lot, but a number from the Rimouski area of Quebec, and also other parts of Lower Canada, present-day Quebec. You know, so there's a real mix of peoples in the 104th. Very much a microcosm of everybody who was in New Brunswick, and in fact in British North America at the time.
So as a community, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to reach out to these communities, and a lot of them have local historical associations that are very interested in this stuff, and try and develop a provincial picture. And I think that's where the committee can add value. We're not coming to the table with a check or a checkbook. We're not trying to spend a lot of money on this. What we're trying to do is use the province's resources to amplify the efforts of local committees and to help them coordinate their activities. So one example of that is, you know, that Molly's been working on the uniforms for the 104th. Well, maybe those resources can be shared. If not the actual uniforms themselves, then at least the knowledge that, well, where do you go to buy a uniform? I mean, not necessarily every little volunteer historical society has those kind of resources. So by working together, we can create these opportunities to tell a broader story.
We have a tweet that probably relates to somewhat to what you were just saying about the money, and it always comes down to that. So, this is from Scotchtown. In a time where we are cutting the amount of road salt we use, how can you justify spending money on a war that ended 200 years ago?
Well, the first answer is we're not dedicating a huge amount of money to this. In fact, as I've said, the role of the provincial committee right now is to coordinate the activities, and we haven't really put any money on the table. That to say that we will be spending some money out of our already allocated budget. So there's the Department of Culture has got some already existing programs, and we'll be encouraging local groups to take advantage of those programs. So there will be some money spent on celebrations and that sort of thing, that's for sure. It won't be a tremendous amount of money, and I think that it's justified because we want to make sure that New Brunswickers do know their history. And every year we do, as a province, we do subsidize some celebrations and that sort of thing. And we want to focus that in this period on our history here between 1812 and 1814. I'm the first to come to the table as a fiscal conservative and say, actually, we have to watch what we spend. But what we're doing, like I say, we're not bringing a lot of money to the table. We are taking the resources that we already have within government. I mean, I'm a volunteer. I'm not getting paid any extra to do this committee, and all of the government officials are doing it as a secondary duty. So they've already got their day jobs, but they're all coming to this committee because they believe in telling the story of New Brunswick nationally, and they can contribute their resources. So we have people from the Department of Education, from Wellness, Culture, and Sport, even from the health branch and that sort of thing, that are able to contribute some of their department's resources to help tell the story. So I think we can do it on the cheap and still have a really good effect.
Yeah, telling the story brings me back to someone like you, Gary. Is there the thought of speakers, giving talks, who really know the stuff?
Yeah, in fact, Molly, I think you've got a few lined up already, and I know St. Andrews does. Weren't you mentioning your speakers program at our meeting this afternoon?
Oh yes, yeah. The St. John River Society is working to put together a series of lectures this spring and fall about the St. John River, and so I know for a fact that one or two of these lectures will be about the War of 1812. But also the Gregg Center for War and Society at the University of New Brunswick has already brought in a number of key lecturers and key historians. I'm thinking, for example, of Donald Graves, who wrote a book called Merry Hearts Make Light Days about the March of the 104th, written by Le Couture, who was on the march. And Donald Graves is recognized as a Class A historian in Canada, and so the Gregg Center brought him in, and they have plans to bring in several other lecturers and hopefully even hold a conference around this topic. So I think the University of New Brunswick is well placed and is really thinking this through about how they can bring expertise to us and how we have an opportunity to access that knowledge as New Brunswickers. I
noticed on the list of people involved with the organization for getting events together, there's a member of the Calathumpian theater troupe from Fredericton. Are there thoughts of perhaps, not necessarily a play, but dramatizations, besides recreations, dramatizations of what the war is about?
And that's a great example. I mean, for example, we provide some seed students to the Calathumpians every year. And this year, we're suggesting, and they're quite keen on bringing these themes forward in their programs. So that's a good example of, it's a government program that's already going on. We're already providing some government support to the Calathumpians, and this time they're using it to talk about our history.
In our remaining couple of minutes, I guess, let's talk again. How can I get more information? You said there's a website. So far, you're working on another one?
We're working on a website. Yeah, it's going to be 1812nb.ca, where people can visit the St. John River Society website as well. You can just Google us. That's ST period, not spelled out. And also